First of all, I'll give you the view that you are seeing. There's a white line and you see red-white antennas along them. This is the border between Israel and Lebanon. We are at the central point. On our left, you will see later, it's the division headquarters who is responsible for the border here. Now, the Second Lebanese War started just 1 kilometer from here on the Hezbollah tried to kidnap 3 of Israeli soldiers. They were killed and they grabbed their bodies. This is how the Second Lebanese War started. This is also, this viewpoint is a memorial for the Second Lebanese War. On the metal plaques you see it's the name of the soldiers who were killed during the war. If I'll give you a general view, so the small town that you see, I think all of you can see the small town is Binjbel. It's the major town in South Lebanon for the central area. And all the villages that you see from here to the skyline is Lebanon. We call it also the green line because you see the green part is Israel. Now the difference between the green and the non-green is a small animal on 4 legs, goats. The goats eat the green on the Lebanese side. We don't use goats, so our side is green. This is why it's a green line. On your right you see Mount Hermon, and I think this is about all. From here we will go to the tunnel. The tunnel is on our left here. It's about 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers from here. It's a longer drive, but it's on a straight line. It's something like 3 kilometers, and we'll talk about it. So I wanted to mention one thing. I don't know if anyone noticed on your way here, you passed by a small village called Sasa, and you saw some armored cars.
Yes.
So this is the village who is probably responsible for saving more American lives than any other Israeli. Why? They design and manufacture all their armor cars for the US military, from MRAPs to the new JV, I don't remember the name, to the new Oshkosh, and even the special forces who have like white Toyotas that have the kits are being manufactured here and sent to the US. So President Obama visited them. It's a village of about 400, 500 people. They have it's one of the most famous in the world. I think they are the second or the third big design house for armored cars. So this is like an anecdote. They live here on the border. They started it like 20 or 30 years ago, more, 40 years ago, building some armored car to the Israeli military, and from there on it became a huge factory. But now to our point. So first of all, I'll try to give you a short history of the border between Israel and Lebanon, and then take you a little bit through the years of the dispute or the fight, the war between Hezbollah and Lebanon. First of all, the south of Lebanon, for many years, it's most of the inhabitants. There are some small villages. This is actually an area which is more Christian, but most of it is Shiite. Now, the Shiite community in South Lebanon is an old community, and it has very long religious connections to Iran. So for many years, students from what we call Jabal Amal, from South Lebanon, went to Iran to learn, and also to Iraq, Qom, and the other Shiite centers in Iraq and Iran. And the same thing happened otherwise. Scholars from Qom especially, but also from Iran, came here and they were part of the community. So this connection is about 1,000 years old. It's not a new connection between what we see now Hezbollah and Iran. Some people think it's a new connection. No, you even notice, who knows a little bit Arabic, you will see that the names are mostly Iranian. It's not completely Arab names. The first names will be Arab, but then second name will be names that are more Persian in their origin. Israel, since its establishment, had an open border with the Shiite community. Meaning the Shiite community used to work in Israel, we used to sell to them. I live on one of the villages to the eastern side on the border. So we grow fruits, mostly apples and others. And we used to sell most of our fruits, not in Israel, but in Lebanon, in the villages. There was very good connection. Still today, there is a good connection on a personal level. But in 1982, so this was quite a quiet border for many years until the 70s. In 1970, what happened is that King Abdullah of Jordan pushed out the PLO from Jordan, and they looked for a new place to deploy, and they deployed in South Lebanon. At that time, Lebanon was on the eve of an internal war, and it was weak, so it was very easy. They wanted the place close to the Israeli border so that they can launch terror attacks on Israel. And all the villages, the Lebanese villages that you see here, there was a deployment of the PLO. This is what started the first Lebanon war in '82. Actually, the deployment of the PLO, I don't have here an example, but I can give you an example. It was something like on a monthly basis that there will be a terror attack launched on one of the Israeli villages. Usually they took hostages, students. One of the famous ones was where we usually do our talk. It's in Misgavam, so they caught a kindergarten. Kids, 3 to 5 years old, 20 kids that were hostage. And for about, I think, 24 hours, there was a hostage release, but 3 of the kids were killed. So most of the villages here along the border suffered a lot. And the second thing, they started launching rockets, 122 millimeters and others, to the Israeli small towns, and then to the villages, mortars and so on. From that, this is what built slowly the understanding in Israel that we have no alternative but to throw out the PLO from South Lebanon, and we cannot live with them. And at that time, Sharon was our defense minister, and the plan was to try to push them 40 kilometers. At the end, they pushed them out completely through Beirut. This is also when I joined the military, so my first war was the first Lebanese war. I started the war in Beirut, in Beirut area, and from there we saw the PLO going out. At that time it was like a dream come true. The PLO deployment in Lebanon stopped, and actually there is no PLO anymore. And then we did not notice, but maybe another fact which is interesting, the Shiite villages in South Lebanon accepted the Israeli military, who actually conquered by pushing the PLO. We had to pass through all these villages with rice. You know, it's Arab habit that when you want to, someone will liberate you, you throw rice, and because of the connection, everything felt very well. Actually, the villages that we liked staying the most is where there was Shiite community. We could, the connection was very good. But at the same time, what happened, the revolution in Iran started. Now, I don't know how many of you are students of Islam and understand the essence of this revolution, but the essence of it, it's called in Arabic, Wilayat al-Faqih, meaning the scholar's leadership. It's moving from the separate systems of the state and the Shiite scholars, that the scholars are to rule. Now, what's really interesting is that actually the Revolutionary Guard from Iran, before they entered, they not really invaded Iran, before they even kidnapped the American students in the embassy, they trained here in Lebanon. They asked the Shiite community, this is where, and some of the PLO terrorists who stayed here, like Murnia, he was a PLO guy at the beginning, they are the one who trained them. And in '82, during the war, the first war, we started seeing something strange happening to the Shiite. We did not understand. It did not take place at the south of Lebanon, but it started taking place in Beirut, in the suburbs of Beirut. And the first one to suffer were the Americans. The American embassy was blown up, the Marine headquarters was blown up, the French embassy, and then they started attacking the IDF. We had two headquarters that were blown up with a lot of casualties. And it was the first time that we encountered a Shiite organization, a terror organization, which was not like the PLO. They looked different, they acted different. And this is, I think, the first time that the long war since '82 till today started between Hezbollah and Israel. Now, inside the Shiite community, there were two big organizations, Amal and Hezbollah. Actually, Hezbollah was a very small organization, extreme but very small, and was quite neglected. The one that we were discussing with and was representing most of the Shiite community was Amal. But history made it different. Actually, with the Syrian intervention and the Iranian intervention, Hezbollah grew stronger and stronger. And Israel understood that it has nothing to do in the depth of Lebanon. And then Prime Minister Rabin decided that we will build a buffer zone that will protect our border. And instead of being inside Lebanon in the Beirut line, then in the Saida area, we retreated into what we call the security zone. It was a buffer zone of between 5 to 10 kilometers along the border. And actually, for me, I served in that area for 18 years. Our system is a little different than the American. We don't have deployment, so this is where we are. So we are deployed here. And I started as a platoon commander. And in 2000, when we withdrew even from the security zone from Lebanon, I was a brigade commander. So you can imagine that area. During these 18 years of fighting Hezbollah, there was a lot of change. But on the Hezbollah side, from a small terror organization, they became a strong and big guerrilla organization, and they are today. There are about 70,000 people, soldiers, which is a small army. And they are equipped with, the estimation currently is about 150 warheads of all types, from small 122 millimeters to Scuds and others that can go to 400 and 500 kilometers. So all Israel is covered. And I will tell you a little bit about their deployments. If I will talk a little bit more, by the way, if anyone has a question, you can stop me during the talk and it's okay. During these 18 years, the Israeli military, what we did in the security zone, we actually had outposts, and we held a South Lebanese militia which was based on inhabitants of the area which was close to the Israeli border, which we had very good connection with them. So, and the battalions within this militia were dependent on the community that it was based on. So in this area, for instance, there was a Christian battalion. On the eastern, there was a Shiite battalion that was under the Israeli supported militia. And the idea was that they will defend their villages. It was on the idea that the PLO will not return. So we wanted to give them arms and so on to defend themselves, so that the PLO, and they were very willing to do it. And the security zone held for these 18 years, which Israel backed this militia for a long time. But the longer this war inside the security zone went on, there was an Israeli political pressure to go out of Lebanon, because what happened really is that the PLO did not deploy back. And actually the Hezbollah claim was Israel is conquering part of Lebanon, and therefore they have a justification to attack the Israeli military and the Israeli border. And Prime Minister Barak took the decision to withdraw from South Lebanon. There was a huge discussion in Israel. Is it a big risk? Is it not a big risk? At the end, we withdrew to the international line. The UN put here the line, and this is the line that you see today. And maybe a year later, Hezbollah started attacking again the border, claiming that there are parts inside Israel that also belong to Lebanon, and that the Israeli existence as a whole is not a legit existence, and the theory behind it, the Iranian theory, you know it. And this is how the clashes started. They started shooting and fighting the Israeli military, trying to kidnap soldiers, but also the Israeli settlement. This is what brought actually the Second Lebanese War. I told you here there was a patrol that was on the border was attacked by Hezbollah special forces. 3 of the soldiers were killed and kidnapped. And this is actually what started the war. But there were a few trials before that, and a few events that were almost as hard as that one. It was the second time that they tried to kidnap soldiers along the border. The Second Lebanese War actually caught Israel completely by surprise. I think both sides were caught by surprise. At that time, Hezbollah built defense lines along their border, but they are, as any guerrilla and terror organization, they were not built like military in outposts and so on. They are inside the villages, in the very spread deployment. And I think what happened is that Israel had no purpose on that, because besides the fact that some soldiers were kidnapped, there was no really a goal to this fight, or maybe a retaliation. So at the end of a retaliation operation, this is what happened. How much they suffered, how much we suffered. And therefore it brought a lot of frustration, especially on our ground forces, because the targets and the aim of the maneuver was not clear. What are we doing there? Why are we? Some of the fights also did not go so well. But on the other side, Israel attacked with the Air Force almost every village, especially the Beirut, and Lebanon suffered a lot. The outcome, since that war in 2006 till today, there are almost no clashes along the border. Some clashes. And I'll talk a little bit how they are deployed today and what is the difference, to understand also how how Hezbollah developed. But I think in the incidents that we see today is Hezbollah is building force. Now, even Nasrallah admitted at one time that the kidnapping of the soldier in 2006 was a mistake. You know, it's a famous interview that was made with him, and he said, look, it was a mistake. We miscalculated the Israeli response. And I think from that on, this is what it's based on. On one side, they are building their force to the day that they will be asked by the Iranian, or that they will need to use it, and we'll talk about it. And this is something that I think also for Israelis was very hard to understand for a long time. How determined they are to build a force to attack Israel. Now today, it's easier for me to explain to you because we'll be in the tunnel and you will understand. They dug tunnels from Lebanon to Israel, I think all in all about 10 tunnels, for 10 years. Meaning immediately after the war, they started digging these tunnels. It's huge tunnels, you will see them, going under the Israeli border and ready for order. They did not open them. It wasn't the moment that it's ready, we are going to go to an attack. No. This is for a day that we will decide to attack Israel. And the second thing that they did, they deployed 14 small battalion sides. It's a special forces battalion, like it's not similar to an American battalion. It's about 300 people. They have 14 battalions along the border. Each battalion had 2 tunnels. Today they have other passes that they are, because we blew up the tunnels and we blocked them. But they are deployed with these battalions. Each battalion holds about 30% of its force on the border, like 300 people. Even in this village that you see under it, currently I know the name of the battalion commander, I know their number, and they have 30% of their force ready to attack. Why? This is for a surprise attack. They understand that Israel cannot hold along the border all the time a big deployment, so their advantage is that they are quicker. Then they can mobilize very quickly their force. If 30% to 50% is already here, so everything they need to do is to move another part of and they are ready for attack. This is like a 2-3 hours in our estimation that they can be ready for a full surprise attack. This is today the biggest challenge that Israel has. Now, we discovered the tunnels. They don't have the tunnels, even though we understand they are still trying to dig tunnels. But you can think of ways to have a force moved from the Lebanese village to the Israeli side. So actually, this is the first layer. It's special forces that are deployed. And then there is a geographic deployment. This is what we call it, but it's more a regular force that defend the villages. And it's actually like a net. You see that the Lebanese villages, you see they are spread. And in every village they have like a company size, something between a big company to a company sized force that has IEDs, anti-tank missiles and they are also, and every 3 villages to 4 villages form like a battalion. And they have a full plan of how they defend each of the area, and it's spread along all the Lebanese territory, depth about 20 to 30 kilometers deep, even more. So they have layers, understanding that if the Israeli military will want to maneuver to the Beirut area, moving north, it will have to cross a full net of villages that are being protected. And the more you will penetrate the arrows into Lebanon, the more trouble you will have on the way. So this is the logic of, now all of this is of course protecting what I told you at the beginning, about 150,000 warheads that they are aiming at Israel. So the organization is prepared quite well for another war with Israel. The idea is that it will be first of all, they will have a surprise attack to the Israeli side and try to slow down the Israeli movement to the border. And of course, when we will want to cross the border, first of all, we'll have to win back the areas that they took, and then the maneuver inside Lebanon will encounter. And all that time, they have enough time to utilize their warheads, and I will not get into details, but just imagine that they have land to sea missiles that can go about 350 kilometers. Now imagine that Israel is dependent on its ports. Since we are closed all around, we don't have any terrestrial way to supply ourselves. We are completely dependent on our ports. So just imagine that a big vessel in a port gets hit. I don't know if there are any Navy guys here, but you understand that to close Haifa port, you just need to hit one big ship at the entrance of the port, and that's it. Now, Israel has no supply. If you also can close the airways, which is quite easy, you see the ranges here. So on that side, strategically, we have it's not a small problem. For Israel, Hezbollah is becoming a big problem. And in order to take out this risk, the operation that has to take place is quite a major one. So I think I got all in all from history to the challenge that we have today, but I think we'll move to questions.
Sir, so you spoke about the battalions that are at 30%. You've spoken about the land-to-sea missiles. Sort of I guess two questions. I'll do the classic two-question here. One is, how does Israel, how do you live under that constant tension here? You said that it would be much slower to mobilize on the IDF side. And then the second one is, we've heard quite a bit about the judicial overhaul or judicial reform, and then the reluctance or the refusal to participate.
Let's separate the two areas.
Well, just thinking about the reserve officers who aren't going to training, does that affect your thinking about the readiness?
Now, let me tell you two things. First of all, how we live with that. We have no other alternative. I live here on the border, so what's the alternative? You cannot deploy the whole military, and we are used to that. It is a little bit hard for an American mind to understand, but I always give the example. I used to be a Special Forces Battalion commander. I was on a mission for search and destroy for launchers. 2 o'clock, there was the time that it has to be launched, and as you know, operations head, we walked, and there was on the way to that there was a clash, and I didn't make it on time. So, you know, I was very close to the target, and then I see the launching started, and I go back and I look at it, and I see exactly at the village that I live that the rockets are falling exactly on our neighborhood. It's a small village, and you could see that. So the first thing that I had is that on the radio, everyone told me, you know, at home everything is okay. So this is a way of feeling. Till today, you will see my sons. They are now grown up and they are soldiers, but even when they were 10 years old, we had visitors here, and you hear noise, boom. We say, no, this is not mortar. This is ours. Don't worry. This is now the artillery is shooting. So you get used to it. It's a part of our life. On the other question, look, it's very hard to understand internal Israeli, but what you see is actually a social issue inside Israel. As you know, we are a Jewish immigrant country. Now, Jews to live together, even two Jews in the same house, is a problem. Now, imagine Jews that came from the Middle East, Arab countries, and Jews who actually built up this state, which is part of and these two communities for a long time have a quarrel. The majority are the Jews who came from the Arab countries. They are in a lower economic and social level than the Jews who came from Europe and built this country, and who enjoy, you know, as first comers always. And it's actually a social quarrel, and this social quarrel goes for many years. Now, for me, it's easy to explain that. On one side, my father came from Morocco. He was born and raised in Morocco, and he came here on his own. On the other side, I completely, on the Ashkenazi side, my grandfather was one of the Ben Gurion people. And I'm on two sides, so I can see it, and it's a lot of frustration. And what you see here is a big frustration on both sides. It's a social quarrel, and at the end we'll come to the understanding. It's not really a judicial thing, and it's not a political thing. It's very simple. It's a social thing inside Israel, and we'll have to solve it. Actually, it's a normal thing. It's like between American communities, the Hispanic community, how do you accept it in the US? Or the African American community, how do you, and there are, it's almost the same. On the level that here we all feel more owners as Jews who came here. And we have here also a problem of Orthodox Jews and secular Jews. So everything is mixing up, but especially Jews in the US ask me about it. And I tell them, look, this is social. We have to go through it. It will not be fun, but this is a part of a process of maturing the Israeli society, and we have to go through it. But
I'm wondering about the impact of the reserve officers who've said, do you think that
you'll just hear attention like this in a second, and everyone is there.
Okay.
It's just talking out. This is part of intimidating each other. We will live here, we will do that, you will do that. But Israelis, you will see it here in war. When there is tension, it takes maybe 2 minutes that everyone joins the line. But yes, please.
Thank you for the talk here, sir. Just kind of piggybacking off of that one there. Some of that social progress that you guys just inevitably have to work through are the ways in which you've seen neighbors exploiting that, right? Where in the past maybe it wasn't so easy to actually tap into and manipulate in some sort of way, but whether it be misinformation or disinformation, are there ways in which they have already started to maybe pipe that fire, or ways in which you envision it happening in the future?
You have to understand very deep the Israeli insight in order to thrive and to get into it. There are sounds that they cannot hear. So of course they will talk about it and they will say Israel is collapsing, but nothing practical will come out of it. At the end, nothing practical will come. I'm completely not worried from the outside. I'm very worried about the inside because it's not a pleasant process. It's really not a pleasant process. But from the outside, I don't see anyone who can really influence the Israeli. No. Yes.
So, sir, as you were talking about your experience in the security zone, it harking back to my experience fighting counterinsurgencies in Iraq and Afghanistan. Obviously, the difference is this is your home. It impacts your home, as the example you gave. But what my question to you is first, what happened to the? You talked about you employed classic counterinsurgency, established a local indigenous security force. What happened to those security forces? And then part two of that is Hezbollah over here. How many are local and how many are foreign?
Hezbollah is
the support of the locals.
No, Hezbollah is completely local. They are all Lebanese. They are based on the Shiite community. It's a big community, completely local in Lebanon. And the militia just fell apart. Some of them left to Lebanon and they were trialed. Some of them were, and some of them came to Israel. It's a small community that lives here along the border of the ex-militia guys, especially officers and so on, that still live in Israel. Israel gave them citizenship, and today they are Israeli citizens, but it's a big tragedy. It's not a simple. Yes, please.
And sir, because of the conditions that they have, but there were the relationships. Is there any communication, positive communication going back and forth, or is that does that not exist?
Does not exist anymore. Yes, please.
Sir, my question is along the line of being a battalion commander in your leadership. So as you mentioned, you've been in this area for 18 years, and I can imagine, I know in my experience as well as a lot of our experience, when you're deployed to an area for a long time, the mission maybe doesn't change as much. How do you continue to motivate your IDF soldiers? How do you get them to not be complacent when you have a mission that's not exactly changing as rapidly as they probably like, and now they are part of these communities? So
in Israel, it's easy. Every 3 years, we are not a professional military. So it's all the time. You are always with the new generation. I used to say that only the commanders stay. And so I led generation after generation, and they are. But the fight here developed a lot. I know very well your challenges in Iraq and especially in Afghanistan. I'll give you just a small examples. The IED that even today you meet in Iraq are like IEDs that in Lebanon are considered very old. Hezbollah is a very sophisticated organization. It can take off-the-shelf technology and put it. So the challenge here always moved. Nothing stayed here the same. Just as I gave you, I was the battalion that I formed. It actually was a unit like a ranger battalion. That we understood that we are standing in these outposts, and we are not going out of the outpost. And actually Hezbollah started building, the way that Hezbollah is doing it, you see no military, on the Israeli side, your military guys, you look and you say, okay, this is a military post, probably this one. You look at the other side, you say, there's nothing there. So this is how they are. They know how to embed into the villages and especially the bushy area, and they will come. Now we had to go out and look for them, and we actually built a unit that this was the specialized in this kind of missions, in order to change the balance, not just to be protected, and you know how it is, into the outpost, convoys, all these that you only gather armor, but then you lose the initiative, you lose the ability to do it. I think you have the same experience, especially in Iraq, that you have to change all the time the tactics and the strategy of how you fight them, and same happened here. I can take you through the years, but it's a long, 18 years is a long time, but no dull moment here. Yes?
Sir, how did you guys discover the tunnels?
Magical.
Look, this is another advantage that we have, since we are fighting over our home. We have imagine that, first of all, unlike the US military, I went to the war college, and the first time that I saw Southern Command and CENTCOM, and I said, well, it's the whole globe. How do they manage this? How do they gather intelligence here? And what are they preparing for? Everything can happen here. I don't. In Israel, it's very simple. You have on one side this one, you have on one side this one, and it's hard, but you know exactly who you are fighting. And you have all the time in the world to gather all the information in details. Now, let me give you a hint. If you take the sensors capability that we have today, if you have the big data and AI, and if you have the technological capability to collect a lot of details and then to run on it everything that you need, probably the outcome will be something that you don't have, I think, the advantage on sitting on one place to collect so much. Maybe in Iraq, it's one example. But I looked at the intelligence and the campaign in Iraq very in detail, and I saw, and still it's far from what we are here, because for 30, 40, 50 years, this is what we do on the same ground, on the same communities. So it's easier for us to uncover what they are doing, especially if they are doing it for a long time. Yes.
Sir, my question's a little broad, but I was wondering if you could speak, based off your experience, about the relationship the military commanders or the military organization has with political figures or government authorities.
Here in Lebanon?
Yes, or just in Israel, like as an IDF officer or commander.
In Israel, between the Israeli political system and Israel?
And the military, yes.
It's a very complex, since we are not a professional military. Our military is based on everyone. Every citizen is military. Today I'm a citizen, but I'm moving out. I have my reserve appointment, and I have to be in, and it's many times you are for a moment a civilian and so on. So the connection is on many layers. And the second thing is that Israel is completely dependent on its military. The American military, if it doesn't do so well, when it's unpleasant for a lot of countries in the world, but it's not that unpleasant to the American citizen. He will not feel it. America is not under attack. If the Israeli military is not doing well, every citizen in Israel feels that. So we are very dependent on that. This gives a lot of power to the military leaders in Israel. And no prime minister will take a risk to take a decision against what the military thinks. So on one side, think of a military which is half civilian, and on the other side, a country which is dependent on that. This creates a relationship which is very complicated between these two parties, and the Israeli chief of staff is considered one of the strongest personalities in Israel. Many people will tell you after the prime minister, probably, on the major things, he has the strongest influence in Israel. So, not that he's good, but it's a fact of life. Let's go.
So, Israeli historian Avi Shlaim says that the 1982 Lebanon War was the first war of choice. Some people think that that was the first war of choice that Israel fought, not of necessity. And I was wondering what you thought of that and how that perception, even of some, might have just impacted what happened here.
It's very simple, you know, necessity. To live on a border with terror attacks and mortar and rocket launching, if it's something that you think is bearable, and especially if you don't live on the north part, then it becomes a choice. In my idea, if a civilian community in your country is being attacked by an enemy, it's the military's job to stop it. And there's no discussion. It doesn't matter if it's a small community at the end or only the people who live along the border and in Tel Aviv is not being attacked. Has no significance. It's like saying, I don't know, some towns along the border with Mexico is being attacked by gangs and they are being murdered, but the American people say, well, this is not enough for us to deploy any force to fight it. Will it be acceptable? No, it will not be acceptable. So, since we live on such an existent threat, it was not an existent threat to Israel. So I understand the idea of saying it's a choice, because Israel is not going to be conquered by the PLO. But I don't think it's also a way of life to have communities along the border live under threat and fire. It's something which is unacceptable, I think, to a country. This is why I believe when Hamas launches rockets at Israel, doesn't matter what the international community says, Israel has to stop it. And if it takes all the power that Israel has to deploy that, then do it, because it's not something that a country can live with. This is my idea. Yes?
Sir, thanks again for speaking. So just military mindset as we look at this, and we talk engagement area development, we talk about the geography that you have, we talk about the human geography of the individuals that are living in these small towns along the border that have predominantly served in the military. I guess my question is, as I look at this, I assume that there is some type of target reference points, engagement area development that's been created if and when this attack that you're talking about. That being combined with the fact that everyone is pretty much militarily trained, is there some type of militia system? I mean, it's going to take a while for the IDF to get here.
Yes.
Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, we have a militia system in every village. Though that I am in reserve in some areas, I also belong to the village militia. I have my gun at home, and I'm like a sergeant at that time. There is an officer, and I'm just a soldier. And I have my post, and when I'm called, and sometimes at night we have a penetration. Usually it's smugglers, but you don't know if it's a terror attack. They will wake up us in the middle of the night. You take your weapon, you'll run to your post and wait for orders. Yes, there is a small militia, and there are also some rapid deploy forces that know how to come here quicker than others. But yes, there is a militia. It's a famous militia here for a long time. Not very well trained. Some of them, wide militia, but yes, please.
Sir, you mentioned that Hezbollah had received a lot of support from Iran as they were kind of building. If they lose that support, which I'm assuming that they still have quite a bit of, how do you see Hezbollah kind of living through that? Will they wither and die, or are they big enough and strong enough to be able to sustain and potentially grow?
Hezbollah resources stands on three legs. One of them is, of course, the Iranian support, which is close to, I think today, something like 600 million a year. They have a big diaspora of Shiite communities and Arab communities who support them. Contribution, it's a big system. And then they have the drugs. It's one of the biggest drugs organization in the world. They have big deployment in South America, but also in other places. They grow opium and everything in Syria and in Lebanon. And they have a nice distribution system. And actually this is their major funding. And it holds them through periods which Iran has problems in paying. But they are more dependent on Iranian weapon and weapon development, even though they have, in some areas, they are more sophisticated than the Iranians in their manufacturing, but not in very high technology for missiles and so on. On this, yes, they are dependent, and this is the fight that Israel is conducting in Syria today, trying to avoid these technologies to enter from Iran to Syria.
So when I teach this in class, I teach it as the Lebanese Civil War, not the the first Lebanon War. And Israel is but one foreign actor essentially in Lebanon, very similar to the Syrian Civil War. And as you study it, what becomes very apparent is it seems like the war is prolonged because of all the foreign actors in Lebanon, which you mentioned is one of the reasons you withdrew. And I was just wondering, do you think maybe the Israeli presence, with the security zone, going all the way to Beirut, actually made the situation worse and extended, these terrorist attacks into Israel and, drew in more foreign actors into Lebanon?
First of all, in '82 there were foreign actors all along Lebanon. We were not part of it. The problem was the PLO, which was a foreign actor that we had to throw out from it. We had no alternative. It was really unbearable to live on this border. Israel, now Sharon, as a minister, had this dream to connect to the... this is where we went one step too far. Thinking in the Middle East that you can involve in politics is something that we gave up a long time ago. Americans still think that they can bring hope and democracies to areas, but good luck with that. Maybe you will, yeah. And at that time we had the same dreams, and as the Americans in some places in the world think that they can. We will join the Christians, and we have good communication with the Shiite, so we will create a big alliance between Lebanon and Israel, and we will hold against the whole Arab world. Well, then the Iranians and the Iranian Revolution, which took place completely from different reasons, has nothing to do with the Israeli invasion, not the Syrians, not anything, and this is actually what changed Lebanon. The real change in Lebanon, if you see from Musa Sader's time, if you teach, then you understand, I think, the importance of his character and his leadership to the Shiite community, and then the whole revolution that the Shiite community in Lebanon, together with the Iranian, it's one thing. And this changed Lebanon. Today, Lebanon is not the Lebanon of 20, 30 years ago. Most of it is Shiite. It's Shiite controlled. Hezbollah is the strongest party. Never used to be that way. So I don't know who is to blame. I know it was a big mistake to think that we can achieve what we wanted to achieve. We had to defend ourselves, to throw the PLO and come back. And the security zone was not really inside Lebanon. It's a very small population that was under our control. So I don't really think it was an influence, but it gave Hezbollah an excuse. And but as you see, they don't need this excuse. We withdrew from there, and still the fighting is going on. So this is, again, it's a matter of Western beliefs that if you'll do one thing, then in the Middle East another thing will happen. Usually something completely else happens. And yes, please.
Okay, 2 questions. So the first one is, has the Israeli government or defense force ever thought about going to an all-volunteer force? And if not,
To go to?
an all-volunteer force like the U.S. military, and if not, why do you think that your conscripted army is the best for Israel? And then my second question is, what keeps you up at night? What do you think is the most viable threat to Israel at this moment?
So the first one is easy. We need a very big force, and there's no other way that we can have all these people. It's also a social thing. As I told you, we came from all different countries, and the military is a melting pot to everything. So it made it easier, but still, I think the need is very simple. We cannot hold a professional military big enough to defend Israel. You see the challenges that we have all along. It will not hold. So I think that for as long as I can see the future, we will have to hold. What was your second question?
What is the most viable threat to Israel today?
Of course, Iran.
Lebanon?
Iran. Look, it's something that for Western it's hard to understand. So some religious leaders in Iran say that they want to wipe Israel off the map. So they say. No, they don't just say, they mean it. They have a plan. And for the last 30 years, if you see the Iranian revolution has a clear ideology. And this ideology is translated into strategy. And this strategy, you can see it along everywhere. You can see it from Yemen to Iraq to Lebanon. And the first block is to have a Shiite presence from Iran to the Mediterranean. There is a small dot on the map that has to be taken off. And they are planning it day by day, and they are pushing into it. And one day it will happen. Now, it will not happen in one day. This is the Middle East way. They will push you, and they'll push you more, and they'll build militia and third parties that will push you out, and they will make your life miserable as hard as they can, and they will damage your economy, and they will damage everything that they can until you're weak enough and they can take it over. So, if you ask me, I don't think there is another enemy around us. Even the dispute between us and the Palestinians is clear. We understand what they want, we understand what we want, and probably it cannot be resolved, but I understand the dispute. It's very hard to understand what the Iranians have against us and why they are so determined to wipe Israel off the map. Well, it's not clear, but what I can see, they are doing it. And if we don't build something strong enough to face this threat, then we will find ourselves and Israel cannot do it alone. This is why I'm worried about it. All the other enemies we can manage, but the Iranian front we cannot manage alone. We are dependent on the US on that. And even though Israel has done and put a lot of effort into the Gulf states, and what you see with the Abraham Accords, this is a part of building this coalition. This coalition needs a leader. Leader probably is not the Gulf states and not Israel. And this leader is a little bit missing in the Middle East, and we feel it very strongly. This is why the Iranians are deploying their forces and doing all what they are doing now so bluntly. And the Middle East is on the verge of this conflict. Hopefully this will change soon.
So what do you think Israel's response should be, or would you do if Iran became a nuclear capable state, which reports are that that's not particularly far away?
I would hope that Israel allies in an alliance will attack. The question is not if it has to be attacked or not. I have no doubt at all. The Iranian with nuclear capability is a danger to the whole Western world. It will change the balance. Now, you don't see it because it's far away, but when they are backed by the Russians and the Chinese, and this balance is changed in the Middle East and in North Africa, and in the Gulf states, they are the first one to fall. The Abraham Accord will break apart. Everything will will break apart. Then the whole balance in the world is changing. So it's not a simple thing. This is why I believe at the end, an alliance led by the US is the right thing to confront what the Iranians are doing. To leave Israel to do it alone, probably we'll have to do it. We cannot risk that they will use a nuclear weapon against Israel. Now, is this completely improbable? I don't think so. The question is, what can Israel harm? Now, this is opening the gates of hell. You understand? This is a war that will take a decade, and it will be hard for Israel. There will be a lot of consequences to that. This is why we really hope. This is why all these forums, I talk to them, we try to influence so that at least the picture will be clear not only to us, but also to our allies. I don't think really it will be very hard if Israel will be left to do it alone. I don't envy the person who will have to take this decision, and I don't envy us on fighting alone such a war. Yes,
Hello,
please.
thank you. I have two questions, maybe one follow-up on that. We've seen North Korea for the U.S. be an existential threat in its nuclear program development. And president after president, we've sort of just let it happen. So is that, using that as a parallel, I imagine that's a concern for Israel. And I suspect that the United States wouldn't necessarily take a different policy with Iran. So I just want to get your thoughts on that. And then the other question is, what amount of autonomy does Hezbollah have from Iran? Because I guess when we're studying, we see Hamas and Hezbollah as proxy groups of Iran. Do either of those groups have much autonomy or ability to make policy decisions or attack without Iranian consent?
So to your first questions, the big difference is the ideology. You have some experience in the Middle East. You've been fighting forces in the Middle East, and you understand. I haven't seen North Korea attacking New York. I did see fundamental Islam do that. Now, make no mistake. The Ayatollahs in Iran are no different than Al-Qaeda. The way of thinking, or ISIS. It's a big difference. And North Korea, with everything that North Korea represents and all the bad thing, at the end it's a state that has thinking in terms of what's good and bad for them, and risks, and what they can gain, its interests. Easier for us to understand. I understand why they did not attack. If I will ask you why Al-Qaeda attacked the US, what's the idea behind it? It will be very hard for you to explain. And I think it's a huge difference. When you are fighting fundamentalists that have this ideology and now they lead a big country and they have in their heads nuclear weapon, you are in a completely different game. This is at least my understanding. On your second question, I think you will have to look at Hezbollah, especially Hassan Nasrallah, as a partner. They don't look at them as a proxy organization, they look at them as a partner. There is a lot of influence of Hezbollah on the Iranian leadership and vice versa. But at the end, I think what I quoted Nasrallah saying that he said that it was a miscalculation, the kidnap. This miscalculation was because he understands that with his allies, like Israel can make a mistake, launching an attack which will not be expected by the US. For long term, it will be bad for the alliance between the two countries, and if the act that Israel will take will harm the US interests, the major interests, there are always small conflicts, yes? Same thing happens here. They will conduct what they have to do even if the Iranian will not give their consent, but on the other hand, they are their allies and they want to cooperate and they have mutual interests, mutual ideology. And so I think this is the complexity between them. Unlike other proxy, Hamas is not at the same level, and even in Yemen, the Houthis are not at the same level. This is not how the Iranian look at them. They look at Hezbollah in Lebanon a little bit different. Last question.
Well, last question is so, sir, say with Iran, perhaps they become a nuclear state. Maybe that gets them on an even footing with what they view as enemies of theirs. But perhaps it'd be counterproductive productive for them to move beyond that? Right now they've gotten this even footing. Do you see any role for mutually assured destruction, nuclear deterrence playing a role in them reaching this state, but not necessarily progressing it beyond that?
They are very practical in what they do. So you see how they maneuver smartly. At the end, they have an ideology, they have a strategy, and they want nuclear weapons because they understand it will change the balance. They want to achieve that without blowing anything on the way. So in order to do it, they're doing it smartly. They will not do a quick move. But the moment that they will feel, for instance, that the US is not strong enough, is not insistent that this will not happen, they will do it. Now look at the difference between the Trump time and this administration. Now Trump made it clear. He made it very clear, and I also thought he was not really stable, and he may attack. And this caused them one simple thing, to freeze. I said, okay, if this is the situation, and we see that the Americans are taking aggressive steps in the Middle East, let's quiet. Now, if they see that no one is standing on guard, and things are being released, of course they will do it. They will take it to the point. They are not looking at Israel. They understand that they can cope with Israel. They say, okay, if they want to have a fight, we'll have this fight. They are looking at the US. What is the US reaction to every move that they make? And the more we compromise on our side, the more ground they take. It's as simple as that.
I know we have to go. Two things beforehand. Number one, we want a group photo with you here.
Here, okay.
I know you don't like to photograph, but we're doing it, Chiko, this time. and number two, I just have a quick question. You can answer it yes, no. We've talked about
no.
We've talked about big strategic issues. I want to talk about the individual soldier. So, you know, Hezbollah is viewed as a capable fighting force. They've had a lot of practice. They've been dealing with ISIS. What is the capability of not only Israel's conscripts, but also particularly the reservists, if it comes to hand-to-hand, face-to-face combat with them? How ready would you say our ground forces are?
So I think on the reserve we have a problem. We are working very hard to close this gap, because the fight in Lebanon is very different from a conventional war fighting, and the training for it is a longer training and it's more complicated. We have neglected this capability in the IDF for quite a long time in the reserve. So it's a big project now in these 2 years because of what's happening with Iran, and we understand that it happened for the Israeli military. This is actually my job now in the reserve. I'm responsible for the starting to prepare the forces to Gaza, and also here we are building a full training compound to do it, and so on. But yes, there is a gap on our side. Now, I'm not sure that they are more trained, but at least we understand where we need to be, and we are far away from that.
The conscripts?
I think in this we are in a better situation. Some units are in better situation, and the situation improved, and it's easy to do it quickly because they are in hand. You can do it very quickly with the forces. What's happening now in the West Bank is slowing us because there's a big deployment in the West Bank currently, and it's on the expense of the training.